So broadly speaking, social determinants of health are the condition in a person's environment that can affect their health and wellness. And oftentimes we think about those conditions that also promote disparities between groups. So common social determinants of health would be things like the physical or built environment, differences in education or access to health care, some of the social influences, and then certainly economic conditions as well. And these social determinants have a huge influence on gun violence, and you can see it right here in our home state of Michigan. In the 70s and 80s, when the big automakers started to decline, we saw these major changes in job prospects in some of our urban centers. So people were losing their jobs. They were formerly middle class, and then all of a sudden these jobs start to disappear. This is an economic determinant. What do folks do when jobs start to disappear? They try to move. Well, in the 50s, you had this major, 50s and 60s, you had this major shift of predominantly white people moving out of the cities into the suburbs. When predominantly African-American people tried to do the same thing during this decline, they found it difficult or impossible. You had then a kind of a concentrated poverty in the cities. So this is an economic indicator because people were trying to get out, but they couldn't. When you have concentrated poverty and disadvantage, you begin to see things like dilapidated or abandoned properties, overgrown lawns and lots. When you start to see some of those physical changes, this is a physical indicator, that often creates opportunities for crime, for places to store drugs or weapons. As crime increases because of some of these physical characteristics, you can imagine how how residents are compelled to try to leave the city to try to change their situation. As people leave the city, as property values begin to decrease, property tax income begins to decrease, then social services like education institutions and medical access also begin to change. So here we have 5 different determinants that are all closely related to gun violence. It's lower education opportunities, less access to service, economic changes, physical changes. So the social context has a huge influence on gun violence, and we can see an example right here in our home state of Michigan. In the 70s and 80s, when we started to see this decline in the big 3 automakers, you saw these changes in economic opportunities with people losing their jobs and losing their incomes. It's an economic determinant. At the same time as people were trying to migrate out of the cities, you saw these wealthy, predominantly white suburbs making it difficult or impossible for poorer, predominantly black individuals to move and integrate into those suburbs, and were forced to stay within the city. And so you have this concentrated poverty. So this is a social determinant that's influencing a potential disparity. When you have concentrated poverty and disadvantage within an area, you begin to see dilapidated and decaying properties or abandoned lots and abandoned houses, which can be places where drugs can be stored, weapons can be stored. It tends to beget crime. As crime increases, more and more residents want to get out. They want to move away. And as more and more people move away and more properties are abandoned, property tax values go way down. They can't support quality schools. It's difficult to support quality access to medical care. All these things come together because they're all influencing in their own ways gun violence and crime. And so when you look at cities like Detroit and Saginaw and Flint, Michigan, you see higher than national and state averages in firearm deaths and firearm-related crime. And a lot of it is attributable to some of these early economic declines and then some of the other determinants that compounded those issues even way back in the 1970s, still manifesting today.